Doing great, Zach. Great to see you. I want your audience to know I remember being on your show as a student at Temple, and now here you are with a national stage. You deserve it. It's great to see you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do congratulate you on all of your success as well. A few books you have authored, right?
Yeah, my second book coming out September 24th. It's called The Franchise, Philadelphia Eagles, A Curated History of the Birds, and it takes you through the past 25 years of the Eagles, including the Super Bowl run in 2017 with Nick Foles, who announced his retirement today.
Yeah, you want to talk about one of the more bizarre careers in NFL history. It's got to be Nick Foles. Super Bowl MVP, a Pro Bowl MVP as well. Had that one season, I think it was with Chip Kelly, where he had like 2 interceptions and all those crazy touchdowns. But once he gets outside of Philadelphia, he can't do anything. It's like crazy.
Yeah, you're right. 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in 2013. Came to Philly as a backup quarterback after almost retiring in 2017. Looked really bad going into the postseason that year. There was actually a legitimate concern about how the Eagles would do, and then caught fire in the NFC Championship game and played the game of his life in the Super Bowl. Now there's a statue outside, and no player in Eagles history will ever wear number 9 again.
Is that number definitely going to get retired?
Well, it's unofficially retired now. Actually, Josh Sweat, the Eagles edge rusher, asked for it this year. They said it's off limits. No one's worn it since Nick Foles, so it's not officially in the rafters, but it wouldn't surprise me if it gets up there one day.
You know, it's funny that you bring up the talk about maybe benching Foles before that run. I remember, covering the team that year, doing local radio in Philadelphia. And at one point, if I heard the name Nate Sudfeld again, I just told callers I was dropping you and hanging up on you. Were they ever close to going to Sudfeld?
No, I don't believe they were close to going to Sudfeld. Actually, the key there that year is they had the bye week. And what Frank Reich and Doug Peterson did during the bye week was go back to those Chip Kelly days. Look at the play. They watched every play during Nick Foles' successful 2013 season, and they really reshaped the offense the best fit Nick Foles, and the rest literally is history.
Talking to Zach Berman. All right, get into this team. It's the multi-million-dollar question. 2 years ago, Jalen Hurts, I know they lost, but he outplayed Patrick Mahomes in a Super Bowl. He looked like he could be an MVP of this league for years and years to come. Last year, they get off to that 10-1 start, and it was just horrendous down the stretch. What do you expect from Jalen Hurts this year?
Well, based on what I've seen this summer, he's going to be really good. And then we've seen the talent in him, obviously. You mentioned the way he played in 2022. Even last year, which was a relative down year, he was still one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. And if we had a conversation in November, you'd be talking about him as a potential MVP, right? They were 10-1, and he was scoring touchdowns. The problem last year was the interceptions, and there was a lack of cohesion with the offense. There was really a lack of direction, as Tim McManus wrote about in the story yesterday that you mentioned. But this year with Kellen Moore, Jalen has kind of this fresh start, and he's been outstanding this summer. 10 practices, has not thrown an interception yet. I mean, I've covered the team for 13 years. You don't typically see that. And what's interesting is it's not done simply by just checking down to running backs or being conservative. He's being aggressive with the ball. He's just putting it in good spots. And the key, he has a good offense here. He had a good offense before too, but I think this is really kind of filling in some of the blanks that wasn't there. And the key for Jalen Hurts that everyone needs to keep in mind is he's got, I don't want to say it's like being on the U.S. Olympic team, but he's got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley behind him, Dallas Goedert as his top tight end. There aren't many teams in the league, if any, that have these types of skill weapons. And so what Jalen needs to do is get rid of the ball quickly, find the guys in his offense, and when the pressure's there, use his legs because he's real dangerous that way.
This team is going to be a playoff team. We all know that. I think they're going to win the division. Like you said, they're absolutely loaded on the offensive side of the ball. But can the coach and the quarterback coexist where we could see them playing in the Super Bowl like we did 2 years ago? So, like, how would you kind of describe their relationship right now? Because that could derail a team.
A, I think they can coexist because they have. And B, I think they can coexist because, I think Nick is a really good coach. I think Jalen's a really good quarterback. I think that in any relationship, there's a lot of dynamics at play. Last year, both of them, I think, felt emboldened coming after Super Bowl season. And the results were not nearly as good as they've been for either of them. I also think that there can be for lack of a better term, creative differences or tension between a coach and quarterback. We all know the Belichick Brady story. You've heard things about Bill Walsh, right? There's different dynamics at play. Ultimately, what you need to have is professional respect, and we'll see how that manifests itself this year. But I don't think that the coach quarterback dynamic is going to be the deterrent for the season in any way, and I don't think it'll be like the impetus for success either. I think ultimately what matters is how Jalen acclimates to Kellen Moore's system, how the Eagles overall acclimate to Kellen Moore's system, how Vic Fangio does with the defense. It's hard to replace two coordinators in an offseason. The Eagles were going through that last year, and it was not a seamless transition. So they have experienced coordinators here, but this is still a major question mark for the team.
Is there a genuine respect, as Zach Berman is here with us, for Sirianni with the players? And the reason I say that is because all the players say they love him, but sometimes when you have a player's coach, there's a difference in being a player's coach and then being a doormat. Like, do those players genuinely respect him?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, if you look at the track record here, 3 years as a head coach, 3 playoff appearances, 2 double-digit win seasons, 1 Super Bowl, right? There aren't that many coaches in the league who can say that. So I can tell you the things I see in the locker room. I can tell you the things that I hear. We can also look at the results, and the results are strong. That said, I can promise you this. I shouldn't say promise you. I can speculate this. If this doesn't go right this year, they're not going to blame Howie Roseman for the roster he put together. They're not going to blame Jalen Hurts as the $250 million plus quarterback. It's on Nick Sirianni's shoulders. So whether the locker room respects him, that kind of thing, yeah, I think Nick's earned that. But I think ultimately they need to win for Nick to keep his job because of those 3 guys that I mentioned, I think Nick is on the thinnest ice, for lack of a better term. But Nick's track record is what it is. And if you want to talk about how the locker rooms responded to him, I mean, I can bring up his first season when the Eagles were 2-5. It didn't look like they were going anywhere, and they go on a run. They make the postseason. I can bring up 2022 when he pushed all the right buttons. Right, last year was a bad year all around, and if the bad year for you is 11 wins, right? I don't want to say so be it because it was unacceptable the way that they collapsed down the stretch. But I think there's a lot of coaches who would take the resume that Nick Sirianni has right now.
So obviously this team has Super Bowl expectations, but how does he keep his job? Like, what's the floor for you that he has to get to this round in order to be back next year? Because I think it's 2 things. Like I said the other day, I think he obviously has to have a better relationship with Jalen Hurts. But then the other thing is you probably got to make an NFC Championship game is the way that I looked at it.
Yeah, look, it's a fair question, Zach. I don't know if it's a specific round. I don't know if it's winning 2 play. If you don't get the bye and you win 2 playoff games,
it's more so the relationship with Hurts, right?
Yeah, or the way the team's playing. If they're maximizing their season, because by the way, like I talked about the skill players, but there are legitimate questions about the team, and you know this well, Zach. Like when the Eagles have been successful, their offensive lines and their offensive line and their defensive line has been dominant. And there are question marks on the offensive line. They're replacing Jason Kelce. There's questions at right guard. There are questions on the defensive line. They're replacing Fletcher Cox, Hassan Reddick, and edge rusher, their best sack producer. They traded him. So there are questions on both sides of the ball on the line of scrimmage, and they need those spots to be excellent for the Eagles to be excellent because their skill guys are outstanding. I think they're quarterbacks near the top of the league. But it comes down to the way they are on the line of scrimmage. And so that's a roundabout way of saying I think Nick Sirianni is going to be evaluated by if he maximizes this roster. Because from the front office's perspective, from the ownership level perspective, all the ingredients are there for the Eagles to make a serious run.
Did you think, Zach Berman, there was a legitimate chance he wasn't going to be brought back this year at any point early in the offseason a year ago?
Yeah, well, look, if you go 1-5 down the stretch, then it's a legitimate conversation to have. If a week goes by after the season and it's not announced that you're coming back, there's legitimate speculation there. If a 6-time Super Bowl winning coach is available and you have a roster of Super Bowl aspirations, it's legitimate speculation. So I would be lying to you if I said, nah, there's no conversation here. But I said at the time, like Nick Sirianni, there's the stats I put out there: 3 years, three playoff appearances, a Super Bowl appearance, and two double-digit win seasons. Like that's hard to find. So I don't think you just shake it up for the sake of shaking it up. I think you shake it up if there's someone out there that you want who's better than Nick Sirianni, and I can understand every argument for bringing Nick Sirianni back. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's a good leader of men. I think he knows how to galvanize a team, and I think they had some problems with the coaching staff last year, and they hope they rectified that this offseason.
And let me be abundantly clear, because I don't want to be disingenuous. Like, hey, Nick Sirianni, when he got hired, exceeded my expectations, what he's been able to do in the last 3 years. With that being said, you talked about it. Belichick was available, right? Harbaugh eventually goes to the Chargers. Mike Vrabel, who didn't have as much talent in Tennessee as what the Eagles have in Philadelphia, at least got them to an AFC championship game. It's like, okay, there is a gamble to some extent with this coach, and there's three options that, quite frankly, I just think are better coaches than Nick Sirianni.
Yeah, look, that's fair. That the knock on Sirianni is that he's had outstanding rosters, right? And so that there's a thought that other coaches can win with those rosters too, and who's making more out of less, if you will. But you can only judge Nick based on the teams that he has. And I think in 2022, he maximized that team, right? In 2021, he maximized that team. In 2023, he did not maximize that team. I think Nick would be the first one to tell you that. I do think they had some deficiencies throughout the year that really came to bear late in the season, but he did not maximize that team. That said, I think that there's a lot of dynamics at play in Philly, right? Like the other thing you have to consider is the Eagles are not a coach-centric organization. I would say the Eagles are probably more of a front office-centric organization. Howie Roseman is more powerful than most GMs. They're a player-centric organization. I think their franchise quarterback has kind of more power and authority typically or I shouldn't say authority, more power or sway than you see in some other places. I think relative to some other teams, like, Bill Belichick ran the show in New England. Sean McVay has so much power, obviously, with the Rams. Howie Roseman is such a central figure in the Eagles organization. And that's not atypical in sports. Like if you look in baseball, the front office carries a lot of the weight, right?
Sure.
But in football, it is relatively atypical.
And that's the one concern I would have about Belichick. I think it'd actually be best for Belichick because you have an elite front office guy, and we all know Belichick's an elite coach. If you let both those guys do their jobs, it's a perfect 1-2 punch. Could Belichick, though, coexist with Howie, with how much Howie likes to control the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard there's professional respect there. Howie's done this for a long time now. He's thought of as a young GM because he was in his 30s when he became it. But that was 2010, right? And we're talking here in 2024, and Howie's put together 2 Super Bowl rosters, right? So his resume speaks for itself. So I don't think that would necessarily be the deterrent or the issue. I think, and look, I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves here talking about Bill Belichick, but I think one of the things you have to consider is how much of the organization you change to accommodate someone who maybe doesn't have like the shelf life of a coach. I don't want to say half his age, but a coach in his 40s or whatever it may be. So that's look, Seth Wickersham, Don Van Natter from ESPN did an outstanding piece over the offseason where they looked at those dynamics. And I think those are all fair. But I think at this point, really, us talking early August, the Eagles entering a critical season. Like this season's about Nick Sirianni now. But it's not a stretch to say that Bill Belichick shadow looms if the Eagles struggle.
Last thing I'll ask you, Zach Berman, the way that Jalen, and we only hear excerpts, right? But the way that Jalen handled yesterday, where he was like, oh, why is this becoming a story now? Like, I get it. There, like, no disrespect to Tim. I respect Tim McManus a lot. I think a lot of us knew what was in that piece before, and the Wink Martindale thing did surprise me. But, like, I didn't love the way that Jalen necessarily handled it yesterday because, like, the fact is, especially when you're playing in Philadelphia where the fan base holds everybody accountable, that 10-1 storyline and trying to figure out what happened and what's going to be different this year from last year, that's going to follow the team all throughout the season until, fair or not, they hold up a Lombardi trophy. So how about how Jalen handled it yesterday?
Yeah, look, Zach, I agree with you intellectually here. And like, if I was the quarterback, I might approach it differently. I can't speak for Jalen Hurts. What I can tell you, and covering him his entire career and being basically in the front row of every time he speaks, is that when Jalen speaks, I don't think he feels he owes the media anything or like the answer that they want. You hear the term rat poison, right? He's got that Nick Saban approach to him there, and there have been times in the past. There was a game against Seattle last year, for instance, when he threw an interception on a play that went off script, and Nick Sirianni fell on the sword.
Yeah,
and I thought then, like, Jalen could throw his coach a bone there and take it, but Jalen's approach in those press conferences typically, it's not to like he typically goes into those with something he wants to say, with what his message is going to be, with what his narrative is going to be. And his approach isn't, I need to placate the person asking the question, right? Or I need to validate this story. And we can talk about what accountability looks like, but I think that there's an argument from Jalen's perspective that he needs to be accountable to his teammates. He needs to be accountable to his coaches. He doesn't necessarily need to be accountable to some short reporter like me sitting in the front row.
I like the way that you put that. He is Zach Berman, Eagles reporter for PHLY. Make sure you check it out. They do great coverage, not only of the Eagles, but all the Philadelphia sports teams. ZB, appreciate it as always. Good deal.
Always. Good talking to you, Zach.